All right, once again, this is going to be more of a topical message. I would invite you to go to Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, for a place to land, but it'll be a little while before we really get there. Next week, we'll spend more time in specific passages, but this week it's more of a kind of an overview, thinking about the topic. I'm going to spend the next few weeks talking about the poor and poverty and Christians and what we should do about this. This isn't going to be the way it is all year. These are just some topics that I've wanted to address for a while: alcohol and the Christian, and obviously that's more from a Bible standpoint. Yeah, thank you. I will get to more exhortative preaching and some other passages, but this is just something that I felt led to do, and so that's why we're talking about it last week and or that last month and this month as well. So let's pray, and we'll get into the study here tonight. Lord, thank you for the topic of the poor and the way the Bible addresses it over the next few weeks. Lord, help us to learn and not just learn, but let the Holy Spirit speak as far as specifically what we should do. I think every one of us has ideas about the way that poverty is in America and in our own area, and our responses in the past. Help us, Lord, to create new responses led by your Holy Spirit and find tangible ways to do what you're commanding us to do in caring for the poor. And so, Lord, to that end, we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Growing up in rural Indiana, largely affluent area, or at least middle class, upper middle class, Midwestern town, I didn't really encounter I didn't encounter homelessness or poverty at all, really. It wasn't until I was in more major cities where I saw a lot of that. I remember you hear reports about how bad San Francisco is. Amy and I got some free tickets because of some things, and we're like, let's go to San Francisco. And this was the beginning of 2018, I think. And you've heard about how bad San Francisco is now, but it wasn't that bad there. And yet there was a real problem with poverty and homelessness. I remember going to look in the shop, and there was someone, I didn't even see him, laying right there in the entryway of this shop. I almost kicked him. I felt bad, but I just didn't see him. I wasn't expecting it. I mean, if you're there, you probably learn to look out for those kind of things, and I wasn't. We took the kids to Dallas after Jared Dye's wedding at the beginning of 2019, and the kids were surprised to see, well, there's just people laying on the sidewalk, and there's just people laying on benches, and they weren't expecting that. And I guess, again, we just don't have the exposure to that. But even in Billings, small little Billings, I mean, important enough to be spied on, but not real big, you know. And they have people out there with their signs, need help. And I have seen that now from time to time here in Park Rapids as well. Poverty is not ethereal. Poverty is not something that we're never going to encounter. Now, the examples I've just given are examples of, I think, what we would call extreme poverty. I've seen more extreme poverty than even American poverty in places like Mexico and Panama. And so it's important to understand, again, in the scale of things, and that's the last thing I'll talk about tonight is that scale. But we will be touched by poverty at some point in our lives, either we ourselves or those we love, or even possibly strangers. And the Bible is not silent about poverty and what Christians ought to do in considering that. We also understand that the church has an obligation to help the poor. In fact, I was thinking about this week in Galatians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Paul's talking about his apostolic qualifications, and he says that when James and Peter and John met with him, it says, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hands of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and that they unto the circumcision. And then he says, only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I was also forward to do. So Paul talked about his mission. He said, James and Peter and John, they were going to minister to the circumcision or Jewish people, and I was going to take the ministry to the heathen. But both of us agreed that in our Great Commission work that we were going to remember the poor. It's an interesting thing because you don't always think about that in relation to the gospel mission of doing something for the poor. So as such, then, we should, as a gospel-minded church, formulate opinions and get God's heart about poverty. So this series will tackle 3 points, one each week. And like I did with the alcohol series, I invite your feedback. You can put it on the back of your scorecard, unless you're so proud of your score you want to frame it at home next to all your cross-stitch psalms. That's fine if you want to do that. But if you'd like to just write it down or text me or whatever, I was really helped by that to help me shape the conversation that we're having and maybe questions that you might have. I do apologize if I didn't address everything in the alcohol series. I feel like I did, but if you think that I didn't, then you're free to even come and talk to me and we can talk about it. But here's the way this is going to go. This week, tonight, we're going to talk about the existence of the poor, the existence of poverty. Next week, we'll talk about the obligation to the poor. And the third week, we'll talk about the church and the poor. So what's the New Testament teaching about our obligation to the poor, and where's the emphasis? This week, we're going to talk about the existence of poverty and the poor. The Bible acknowledges the existence of the poor and the existence of poverty. Exodus 22, verse 25, right away after the Ten Commandments and in all those commands, talks about how the way that the people of Israel, when they were setting up the nation of Israel, should treat the poor. And we'll talk about that more next week. But there was a system in place because there was the admittance that, yes, there are going to be poor people. There are going to be people that find themselves in poverty. There were poor people in Israel for various reasons. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Next week, we'll talk about the provision made for the poor, but the Bible does not deny the existence of the fact that there are people in this world that are poor. Now, let's ask the question before we go any further, how do we define poor, or how do we define poverty? Webster's dictionary says this, quote, wholly destitute of property or not having property sufficient for a comfortable subsistence. Okay, that's, I'm like searching for the pronunciation. Needy. It is often synonymous with indigent and with necessity. You know what? Reading is just not going to be my thing here tonight. Necessitous, denoting extreme want. It is also applied to persons who are not entirely destitute of property, but who are not rich. As a poor man or woman, poor people. Okay, so is that a good definition? Someone who's poor is someone who's not rich? Is that like it? You're either poor or you're rich? I guess, right? Because you always know somebody who's richer than you are, right? I'm no Jeff Bezos, you know, he's rich, and it's always kind of funny. I'll talk about this at the end. There's always, on that scale, there's always somebody, they're the rich ones, not me, you know? And so what would be maybe a good definition? I would say something like this: those without the means to take care of oneself. That would be someone who is poor, someone without the means to take care of themselves. Or those in extreme need. Extreme need would be something that would eventually lead to the endangerment of life. Not just that you're not thriving, but that you are actually dying, as it were, because of your extreme want and the needs that you have. Now, the world defines poverty in different ways as well. The UN defines poverty as those who are earning less than $2. I've seen anything between $2 and $2.15 a day. So if you're earning less than $2 a day, the UN would say you're in poverty. The Census Bureau uses a formula to be able to say what poverty is. They have a lot of different things that go into it: where you live, how many people in your household, what the standard of living is in your area. And so they have this whole thing that they use. The federal poverty guidelines for the HHS for the 48 states and DC says something like this. The federal poverty line. If you're a single person making $13,590 a year, you're in poverty. If it's two of you, if a family of two, and you make $18,310, then you're in poverty. If you're a family of three and you make $23,030, then you're in poverty. If you're a family of four and you make $27,750, then you're in poverty. If you're a family of five and you make $32,470, you're in poverty. If you're a family of six and you make $37,190, you're in poverty. If you're a family of seven and you make $41,910, you're in poverty. And if you're a family of eight and you make $46,630, you're in poverty. Now, of course, most programs like SNAP and food stamps and WIC and all those things, they usually go like 150 or even 200% above what the federal guidelines are. So for some benefits, like around here, a family of seven like ours, I could make close to $83,000 and still apply for the benefits. And we'll talk about that next week. Of course, these numbers are a little bit skewed and a little bit unrealistic, because if they say you're in poverty if you're a single person making $13,950, well, that's $6.50 an hour if you're working full time. I guess the idea is that maybe you're not working full time if you're only making $13,590 a year. But if the myth of the minimum wage isn't enough to live on is not what the federal poverty guidelines are suggesting. Now, it happens to be quite true that you're not going to thrive if you're working 40 hours a week, working minimum wage. And I don't know if you've looked at housing around this area, rental or otherwise, but you are not going to make it on minimum wage around here. It may be different for other places, it may be. But also, I don't know of any places around here that pay minimum wage. So that's another thing too, right? Okay, anyway. Hubbard County, interestingly enough, the poverty rate is 11.82%. So in Hubbard County, that would be, again, the extreme poverty, those who are under the federal poverty guidelines. The Bible uses the word poor 205 times, and 36 of those times it's paired with the word needy. Now again, when I say the word poor shows up 205 times, sometimes it's blessed are the poor in spirit, or in Psalms, I am poor and needy, or this poor man cried. And so there are different uses of the word poor, but often, and again, more than any other word that's paired with the word poor is the word needy, 36 times in the Bible. And so the idea is someone who is poor is someone who has a need that they cannot meet on their own. Now, we'll talk about that as we go along, but just I'm trying to build for you an idea and a definition of what poor is. Now, consider this. In Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 11, God says to the people of Israel, "For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, Thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor and to thy needy in thy land." Now, that's interesting, isn't it? God can do whatever he wants. God is setting up the nation of Israel, and yet he says there will never not be poor people in the land, even in a land as beautiful and bountiful and as blessed as Israel. Jesus said, remember when the woman came and brought an offering, and Judas and some of the disciples were grumbling because that money could have been sold and given to the poor instead of worshiping Jesus. And you remember what Jesus said? He said in 3 different Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, the poor always ye have with you. You're always going to have poor people. And Jesus even in that instance said, listen, if you have this valuable resource, it's not always the best thing to use it for the poor, because you're always going to have the poor. Now again, if you think about it in those terms, then that kind of reflects often the way that we think about the poor. It's such a big problem. What can you even do? Right? It's such an insurmountable, it's like this tidal wave. What can you even do? And you and I might feel good about ourselves by giving someone $5, buying someone a sandwich, we as a church doing something for benevolence for someone to help them out. And yet we also say as we're doing that, but what is this among so many? What can we do against the problem of poverty? The Bible acknowledges the existence of the poor, even while lamenting it. So let's talk about the causes of poverty. Now, what does the world say that are the causes of poverty? I'm going to get my source here. According to health.gov, one of the first things that they mention are ethnic and racial causes. The fact that there is discrimination, which leads to real problems. Now, that would be true, wouldn't it? If there's discrimination, you're not letting the poor get the opportunities that they need. I don't know that that's true. I've never seen it. I've never talked to someone who is discriminated against in the 21st century, but that's what health.gov is purporting is one of the biggest reasons for poverty. One that I've heard and that, this health article from the government put out there was the idea of generational poverty. That if your grandfather was poor and then your parents were poor, there's a pretty good chance that you're not only going to be poor, but that you're going to stay poor, and that your children will be poor, and that your grandchildren will be poor, and so on and so forth. I think all of us have seen examples of people that have gotten themselves out of poverty, but the reason you know about those is they're so rare and remarkable. We've also seen people that have had great riches and yet expended all of it so that they were poor, and it's very difficult to get out of that again. So part of it is generational poverty. It's hard to climb out of that pit. Not just because of the money aspect, but because of what you learn being generationally poor. You learn to eat unhealthy food. You learn to be obese and thus unhealthy. You learn to smoke to cope with the things that you're dealing with, and you then have a lower lifespan because you've learned all these things that are going to cause you more problems and thus more money in the future. You also learn the culture of poverty. I have a book, and I was looking for it on my shelf. I don't remember exactly. I don't know if I loaned it out to somebody. I had loaned it out to Seth, but he gave it back to me, so I don't know where it is. But it's a book by Ruby Payne called Understanding Poverty, and I read it probably 7 or 8 years ago, and it was so good for understanding that it's not just you have rich people, poor people, but that there is a culture of rich people, a way they think, and a culture of those in poverty, and even a culture and a way of thinking in middle class. And one of the things she said in her book was that if you're going to go from lower class to middle class, you actually have to not only have someone to guide you and help you with it, they have to explain the rules, and you have to, in many ways, turn your back on the class you're coming from. Same thing if maybe you've known somebody who went from middle class to upper class. They had to have someone who helped them get through all of the, guide them through the world of the upper class. And they had to have someone explain the rules. We don't talk about this. We don't say this. The faux pas of in a social setting, you don't do this. And in many ways, maybe you've experienced this where you've had someone who used to be a friend, but they got wealth, they got into money, something happened, and now they're too important for me. So this idea of, it's across the board. It's not just that those in poverty have a wrong way of thinking. They have a different way of thinking than you and I do. And again, it was an interesting book because they talked about the fact that teachers would go and they found out that these kids had no refrigerator. So the teachers pooled their money together to buy a refrigerator for these kids so they'd have something and they could get ahead. And then weeks later, the kids weren't in school. And when they came back, they said, "Where were you?" And they said, "Oh, we were on vacation." "Where'd you get the money for vacation?" "Well, we sold the fridge." And you, middle class person would never do that. We understand if you get a gift from someone, you might have a Christmas sweater that you hang on to for years because you're not going to, you maybe can't sell it, but whatever, It's like, this is not polite. And there's a whole idea in the lower class. It's like, well, this just makes total sense. And very interesting if you're interested in the ideas of poverty. I didn't want to bring a lot of that into my sermon tonight because it is extra biblical and this is a church. We're talking about things, but I'm just trying to get you to think about the reasons and the causes of poverty. There is a culture of poverty. And when you say that doesn't make sense, what you have to say is that doesn't make sense to me in my middle class, upper middle class, maybe upper class mindset. I don't understand the way that you're thinking about this. Because it's like a different culture. It might as well be a different country, but we're living all in the same kind of place. To leave, then, is to turn your back on others. And so there's something that kind of keeps you in. That's another aspect of generational poverty. Someone gets too good for the projects, too good for the family, too good for the trailer park, whatever it is, and that's a hard thing to turn your back on. They also don't have any access to those in poverty have no access. And again, this is what the world is saying. They highlight that there's no access to stable, affordable housing and stable, safe neighborhoods. Often, if you're going to find a place that you can afford, it's going to be in a place that you are going to be in danger. And maybe your stuff might get stolen. You have no access to health benefits, healthy food, healthcare access. Go into any convenience store and they don't really serve health food there. You eat that and you're going to have health issues and problems. They don't have access to good paying jobs, especially those that you can advance in. They don't have access generally to good education. And if you have good education, that can lead to new and better opportunities. Now, again, that's what the world is saying, and I think a lot of that is right. In America and the way we think about things. It's interesting how people aren't really talking about one of the single greatest impacts on poverty, and that is single parenthood, especially single motherhood. The National Institutes of Health did a study and they said this: in 2012, approximately 21 million children, or 28% of all children in the U.S., lived with one parent. That's a real problem. That's a real problem of perpetuating poverty when you have single mothers. According to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, 28% of single parents are in poverty compared to 6% of married couples. So it does make a difference. It does make a difference. Now, again, I don't have time to go into this, but those that are in poverty were at some point in the past especially told, you don't need to be married, you don't need to have a stable family, and these, what many of the ideas that are being out there is we need to destroy the nuclear family. Now, I am for the nuclear family because of what the Bible says. You have a father and a mother, and if everything goes well, they get married and then have children, and that will create a stable home. I think that's good biblically, but it's also, if I was an atheist, you couldn't deny the fact that a nuclear home is a stable force in society. And there is an actual... It feels like there's an actual war against that kind of idea. From a Judeo-Christian aspect, they don't want to talk about that because it sounds like we're saying, you have to have a Christian culture. Well, it just so happens that when the Bible talks about the way they were made and human flourishing, it talks about it in a way that is biblical. You can't flourish biblically and not in some way, you can't flourish and not flourish biblically. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just the way that goes. So what does the scripture say about poverty's causes? Often in scripture, we see the word or the phrase, if your neighbor waxes poor. And the idea of waxing poor means that it happens kind of incrementally, where it happens maybe over time. Now, sometimes it does happen suddenly. Like Job, in one day, went from very wealthy to very poor, where he had, 4 servants and a wife, and that was it. I mean, maybe he had his house still, maybe he had some of those things, but he was poor suddenly. So when you think about causes of poverty, especially in Old Testament times, a drought over a season, a fire that destroyed your crops, Maybe because somebody tied some foxes together and, set them loose in your corn. You have raiders coming in, destroying your crop or your flock or stealing from it. You have diseases that ravage not only crops and cattle, but family, where all of a sudden now you don't have those children or the father's not present to help move things along, especially in agricultural society. So those things. Sometimes, though, it's over time. Events that make it harder. Think about the story of Elimelech and Naomi. There's a drought in Bethlehem. And so they and their 2 sons go to Moab. And while they're there, Elimelech dies. And so Naomi finds wives for her 2 sons. And they don't have any kids. They're there for like 10 years and they don't have any kids. And all of a sudden now the sons die. And here's Naomi going back to Bethlehem with nothing. Maybe poor choices, but that's just the way that life went. Sometimes it happens over time. In ancient Israel, everybody started with large tracts of land, right? If you think about them going into the promised land, again, we're not there yet, but when you get into Joshua, and you think about how much land each family had, so much land, they probably couldn't even farm it all, and then you were going to parse that out to your kids, and eventually, the way that things go, everybody would have a pretty good piece of land, and every 50 years, if you fell on hard times and you had to get rid of it, every 50 years it'll go back to you, and so there was really no reason for poverty, fundamentally, except that things happen. Sometimes people wax poor. Sometimes someone is poor because someone made them a victim. Judges judge against them and stole what belonged to them. Someone tried to sell them into slavery and took advantage of them. We'll talk about those next week. They were maybe victims of crime. Job 24:14 talks about the murderer rising with the light, killeth the poor and needy, and in the night as a thief. The rich, of course, have a means of protecting themselves, right? If I'm a millionaire, I can afford maybe an armed guard and a gated community and a fence and a camera and a gun and all the things that I can do to lock up my stuff, to keep my stuff. If you're poor, maybe even if you get something nice, it might go right away. Here in Proverbs chapter 10, sometimes, though, so I said, how does it happen? Sometimes it happens, but no, you didn't have any. Things just happen, natural disasters, whatever. Sometimes it's because you're a victim and somebody else came and victimized you. Sometimes it's because you yourself were slothful and neglectful. Proverbs 10, verse 4, he becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. Right? We talked about this on Wednesday night. All these things are kind of coming together because I preached this morning on the radio out of 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. He that won't work shouldn't eat. And I'm thinking about that and the sluggard series we did on Wednesday night. And then here we are talking about it tonight. One of the reasons that people aren't rich is they don't work and they become slothful. Maybe it's a desire to have nice things. Go over to Proverbs chapter 21. Nothing wrong with having a few nice things. I can say that and not say with Creflo Dollar and all the rest of those idiots that Jesus had really nice things, and so it's good for us to have overly exorbitant things. But it's also true that the more of those nice things that you want, the less money you have to spend on probably things you need, and the less of a margin you have of error when those things happen. So look at Proverbs 21, verse 17. He that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil shall not be rich. Why? Well, wine and oil are nice, but if you love those things and you love kind of the nicer things in life and you fill your home with that, then you're going to have less money to do other things. And if something happens and all of a sudden you get used to, you hear about this all the time, right? Somebody who's in a rock band and, these 3 scraggly guys make it big and then they VH1 or some cable company said, where are they now? And they go to this person and they're selling cars somewhere because they had this vast fortune because they made it at this rock band but they loved the mansions and the parties and the drugs and now they have nothing. right? This is what happens. Sometimes it's just you spend your money poorly on nice things, and then you don't have anything. Go back to Proverbs chapter 13. And this one, I'm maybe not right on my interpretation on this one. This is the way I thought of it. I looked at some commentaries, and what they were saying didn't make sense, but I didn't see anybody who was absolutely agreeing with what I was saying either. So take this with a grain of salt and be a good Berean. But sometimes people are poor just because of ignorance. They don't know what to do with their things. They don't know how to keep their things. And that's the way I'm reading Proverbs 13, verse 23. Much food is in the tillage of the poor, but there is that is destroyed for want of judgment. So when you till the ground up, there's great potential. Oh, this is going to turn into great food. But because you have a lack or a want of judgment, all of that can be destroyed. You know, I'm going to go and plow my field and put the seed in the ground. Oh, but you did it right before it rained, and you did it in a time when everybody else is waiting to do that because we're still in the frosty season or whatever, or you didn't do it right. You did it, but you didn't do it right, or whatever. Because of want of judgment, sometimes those things can happen, and then again, there goes your margin of error. Ultimately, God sees those in poverty. He's sovereign over their lot. 1 Samuel 2, verses 7 and 8, the Lord maketh poor and maketh rich. He bringeth low and lifteth up. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princes and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he hath set the world upon them. So ultimately, God sees those in poverty, and he also calls us to do something about it, which we'll look at later. Finally, let's talk about the sliding scale of poverty. The federal government, when they set their federal poverty guidelines, they have to draw the line somewhere. But it's also true that we can make it on very little. The federal poverty guidelines are based on the fact that there is a standard of living. And they use that phrase, you've heard that phrase as well, standard of living. Well, let's just all admit that the standard of living is higher in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world. Now, again, not all places in the U.S. are equal, but by and large, you can do really, really well for yourself in the United States. The standard of living is higher. Not just you can do well for yourself, but we have the things that people are in poverty are, the people that are in poverty here in the U.S. have a higher standard of living than most other places as well. So this should be our focus on those abroad. Thus, should our focus be on those abroad who are below our standard of living, or should they be on people in this area that are not up to the standard of living? And I think the answer is yes. But we just have to understand that it's not that we're trying to bring everyone up to our standard of living. That's not the goal. And that's not always easy to talk about and understand. We understand that the word need. So when I define poverty as someone who is needy, right? But let's all admit that the word needy has a sliding scale, that it's not always easy to determine that. So if we were going to use something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or at least just a simple understanding of the things that you need, the number one thing would be what? Food, right? Need food. Now, it's very easy to get food in America. Every foreigner that I've heard that come to America, they're surprised, especially those in third world countries, of how much food we have. You walk into Walmart and you're just floored by all the food that's there. Now, let's ask the question, is it all good food? Is it all healthy for you? Does it all taste good? No, that's harder to get. And I've found in my dealing with poor people around here that a lot of poor people don't like healthy food. They don't like food that's good for them. They've learned that I like this food. I like Hot Pockets and frozen pizzas. Well, I like frozen pizzas too. It's been a long time since I had a Hot Pocket. I like those things. I like ramen every once in a while, but I know that's not good for me, right? If I'm going to get healthy, if I'm going to stay healthy, if I'm going to maintain, then I understand that there's a standard of food that I need. Number two might be, besides access to food, access to protection. Clothing is very cheap in America. Now, not the nicest clothes, but it's easy to get your hand on something. It would be very be very easy if we had people in our community that needed clothes. It would be very easy to meet that need. Housing, however, is very expensive. And again, I don't know the last time you looked around here at housing, but it's just very expensive to live in Park Rapids. And, when Amy and I first got married, we lived in the upstairs of a farmhouse. It was small, but we paid $350 a month with utilities. And that was cheap. It was so nice. I don't know that you could get anything around here for 3 times that. It's just very, very expensive to live in this area. And there's not a whole lot that we as a church can maybe do about some of that. Number 3 would be access to health care. And again, that's another hard thing that's harder to do too. Churches cannot help much in this area directly. We don't have any doctors that go to our church that would be willing to treat people for free. That would be a harder thing with the healthcare or the health insurance industry that has driven up prices and litigation. Healthcare has become very expensive, and that has made it just harder for people and harder for us as a church to help meet those needs. Access to healthcare, or access to standard of living. Most places around here will have running water. That's relatively inexpensive. Heating is essential, especially in Park Rapids, Minnesota. But you have control over how much fuel you use in your dwelling, right? And you go into a place of poverty, and it's 70 degrees in there, and you think to yourself, well, having it warm is nice for sure, but all of this costs money. And you have it at 70, and then you sleep with the window open and the fan on because you like a cool breeze. And okay, well, there's a lot we can do about this sometimes, right? Electricity is essential, but again, you can control how much you have to use. What we're saying is, okay, if it was just food and clothing, I think the church could meet that need, but now we're getting to the point where it's like, sometimes people are like, well, I need electricity. You do. Yes, you do need electricity generally to live around here, and heating, you need fuel to be able to do that. However, there's a stewardship issue there as well, and we're getting closer to where we can't help as much as we'd maybe like. Transportation is essential. If you don't have a reliable transportation, you're going to slip farther and farther behind. Having a car can be more productive. If you have a car, you have a better option of getting a better job. However, if you have a car, cars cost money, and especially if you can't afford a really nice one, then you're going to be working on it quite a bit. Now, there are other areas as well. Scientific American had an article that said that air conditioning should be a human right in the climate crisis. Air conditioning is a human right. Well, I mean, if we as a church are going to meet needs, are we going to put that on the needs, right? So what I'm saying is this, like, we need to in some way be able to say, okay, we want to help meet needs, but a need, we're going to have a certain way that we define that, a certain profile of what a needy person is. Because if it's, I need help with my electric bill, oh, that's one thing. If I need help with my heating bill, that's one thing. I need help with my heating bill so I can have my apartment this warm all the time, that's another thing. What's the greater need there? Money or something else? And so there's that sliding scale of need all the time, right? I need transportation. Okay, we can probably help with that. But there's also the obligation that you would do something as well. Again, this is kind of setting the stage for what I want to talk about in the third week, but some things to think about. Is air conditioning a need? How do we define the kind of person that we're willing to help? And that standard of living, that we can help you get up to that. If you're above that, we can help you in other ways to help you rearrange some of those things, or maybe we wouldn't help you. Having a phone is a must for many, but having a phone has become a need in our society when it's not really a need. How many of you could do without a phone if you needed to? Yeah, I could. It would be a real pain. It'd be real hard for you to get a hold of me. You just have to know that there's one of two places to call me, at the church or at my house, not on my cell phone. Most in poverty have things like a TV, I've never actually met anybody in poverty that didn't have a TV, and most of them have other things as well. Then there are things that are the real needs, right? These are real needs. When we talk about we're going to help needy people, and we have that sliding scale, we're trying to define what we mean by need. There's a real need for people to know how to cook food, because it's cheaper to prepare your own food than it is to buy something that's prefab and you throw it in the oven. It's quicker, and there's an issue there. Sometimes moms need help, and we could come alongside a mom that needs help and teach cooking or provide meals or something, but that's a need. That's a need. There's a need to know how to get a better job so you don't get stuck in a low-end job. Somebody who is just kind of existing, it would be, maybe the need that we could provide is something where we could help get trained into a better job or work with them and give them a recommendation and stick our neck out for them a little bit. There's a need to know how to parent, to get your kids out of that cycle so that you're not perpetuating that generational poverty. There's a need to know how to get off drugs if they're on them of any kind. Some people, they're in poverty and they don't want to be on drugs, but they don't know how to get off drugs. There's a need to know how to maintain things, how to maintain your car, how to maintain your checkbook, how to maintain healthy habits, right? What we need to find, go over to Proverbs 30, and this is the last thing I'll say. What we need to find then is that balance and that sliding scale of what a needy person is and then what we as a church can do to help them. In Proverbs 30, verse 7, 2 things have I required of thee, deny me them not before I die. Remove far from me vanity and lies, give me neither poverty nor riches, feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. Right there, the writer of Hebrews in Wisdom says, there's a place that's the best place for me, where I'm not so full that I become self-reliant and I don't need God anymore. But I'm not so desperate that I'm tempted to steal just to have my needs met and take God's name in vain. Live like someone who claims God, but nothing in my life says that. If we have too much, we don't have use for God. If we have too little, we're tempted to steal. So the question is always, and that we're trying to direct people to, what does God want me to have? What are the things that are best for me? And how can I steward what God's given me to be a blessing to others, to thrive in my own doing? And so this week, what I wanted to talk about is just the idea of poverty. Next week, we'll talk about what the Bible said to the ancient Israelites about poverty and how that might apply to us. And then the third week, we'll talk again about the church's obligation and what the New Testament focus is on when it talks about those in poverty. I've given you a lot to think about. Write some things down if you have some feedback, good or bad, and maybe questions, some other things. Maybe even at the end of week 3, we could spend some time afterward and even kind of give blessings, not blessings and testimonies, but maybe some feedback about experiences you've had as well. So thanks for talking about this with me and thinking through it. It's an intellectual exercise. It's also, we're trying to think about this biblically. So